Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mahboubeh Hashemi. Today we'll be talking about strategies to living better and performing better. A little bit about me. So I was born in Iran and I grew up in Dubai. I got my BS in bioengineering from University of California, San Diego, and then went later on to get my doctorate of naturopathic medicine from Vassar University, California. I also received specialized training in biofeedback, which we talk about planning this today during this presentation from Vassar University, Heart Math Institute, and Association for Applied Psychophysiology and Biofeedback. I'm the co-founder of Conscious Human Medicine, along with my partner, Dr. Caviola. And at Conscious Human Medicine, we basically use cutting-edge tools and techniques to not just prevent and treat chronic disease, but also enhance physical and mental performance. So a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today, starting with discussing the importance of self-regulation, and then moving on to defining biofeedback, how it can help you. A couple of modalities that we're going to focus on within biofeedback would be heart rate variability and breathing or respiration, and then discussing a couple of cases on both hypertension and cognitive performance or brain power. So let's kind of give some context to what we're going to be discussing today. So what is stress? A lot of us talk about it, and we mention it on a daily basis. But what is stress? It's the result of a response to a change. So that need, so the change could be physiological, hormonal, mental, emotional, and the need to respond to that change can cause stress, and it can be good or bad. So if you, let's say you decide to fast or take a cold shower or go and exercise, these all are forms of stress to the body, but they're controlled, they're good, and can be good, versus a prolonged form of stress, chronic stress, which we'll be talking about throughout the presentation. And then the response. So the question is, what have we learned thus far? What have you learned thus far? You know, what has been modeled for you in terms of how we respond to triggers or stressors? And no matter what has been the case thus far, proper and proportional responses can be learned. You know, if you think about the people that we look up to and how they operate in life and how they're, you know, always seem to be on top of their game, it does not, all of it has come naturally. It's been learned. It's been them being involved in the process of really, you know, the next word, awareness, self-awareness, developing that self-awareness, which I really think is a superpower. So having that ability to observe, to create just a space and a pause to recognize that we have a choice, you know, instead of going on autopilot and as soon as the trigger happens, we have this automatic response to take a pause and say, well, I can respond this way or that way. And, you know, during this presentation, I invite you to keep an open heart and an open mind and just be curious. In kind of following, you know, we talked about stress a little bit and our responses and how that can be learned. You know, following that is, what are our coping mechanisms? So how we choose to respond, or even knowing that we have the choice, and then how do we cope with it? Because, and why is that important? Because it's not a matter of if, but when adversities, you know, difficulties, challenges, chaos happens in our lives. And if not in ours, in the lives of people that we love, or strangers that cross paths with us. So really learning these life tools are not just important for us, but for the lives of people that we cross paths with. And this is basically part of what I want to emphasize today, to really have developed the awareness and that sense of responsibility to become empowered. All right, self-regulation. Being in charge of yourself, to maintain your inner composure when challenges arise. And, you know, how do we achieve it? Not through a top-down, and by top-down I mean your brain telling the rest of your body, hey, I'm going to will this and I'm going to control it. So it's not more so a matter of control, but an understanding of how have things been, how are things right now as a baseline for you, and you will hear this term a few more times in this presentation, and then building and improving upon that. So if you think about, thoughts normally lead to or elicit emotions, and emotions are what lead to, we'll talk, further down the slide about to many physiological responses. Therefore, emotions are the primary driver of physiology. So let's say a stress sensation, which we'll give examples of later on, can lead to about 1,400 different biochemical changes in the body. And over time, again, talking about that prolonged stress, these changes are harmful to your health. They deplete your energy, they drain you, they inhibit brain function, we'll talk about that later, and create unhealthy pathways. And the more we respond automatically, the more we strengthen those neural pathways. But if you look at the other side of it, good sensations, feeling joy and appreciation and love also come with 1,400 chemical reactions. So focusing on those, again, we'll talk about them. So what is biofeedback or mind-body medicine? There are three facets, and as we go through the slide, I'll talk about them. So the first is awareness. We already talked about it as a superpower. What can be more, we may or may not be in charge or in control of what's happening outside of us, but we definitely can be aware and able to modulate what's going on inside of us. So the first piece is that awareness. And biofeedback uses tools and techniques to show that to you. We will talk about them. So what are those? Respiratory rate and rhythm, so your breathing rate and rhythm, your heart rate and rhythm, your skin temperature changes. Again, when we're stressed versus not stressed, these things change. Sweat, especially at the extremities, and muscle tension. These are all different variables that we look with in biofeedback. So once you have that information and that awareness, then you can change and sustainably change. And to create that sustainable change, you have to make it familiar. So take what has been familiar away and make this now new thing familiar and make it your new baseline. And then just like, your yoga teacher says, I want you to take your yoga practice out of the mat and into your day. The last piece is generalization, meaning taking your biofeedback session, what you've practiced with your practitioner, into your daily life and implement that. So what can biofeedback help with? Just to name a few, because otherwise we have to spend the rest of the presentation talking about it. Anxiety, depression, asthma, migraine and tension type headaches, essential hypertension, IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, Raynaud's phenomenon, and chronic pain disorders, and much, much more. So biofeedback modalities. The two that we're going to focus on today are heart rate variability and breathing. But then we also have surface electromyography, or EMG, temperature, and skin conductance, which refers to basically a perspiration at the extremities, measuring those. So for each of these, if your practitioner is using instruments to practice biofeedback with you, there are sensors that measure all of these different signals, send it to an amplifier, and through that you can see it on your computer screen. All right, so let's start with heart rate variability. What is that? If you break down the word heart rate, so variability within our heart rate, it's a measure of change in the beat-to-beat interval of the heart. It's a normal physiological response. So when you go to the doctor and they measure your pulse and it says, let's say 67 beats per minute, that is a constant, that's one number, it's a snapshot, but that's not how things work really. With every inhale, so there's changes with breathing. With every inhale, your heart rate should increase, and with every exhale, it should decrease. So you have, within even one breath cycle, you have variations in the heartbeat. And that's what is heart rate variability. So do we want it to be high or low? Absolutely high. A high heart rate variability is a good thing. It means your system, your heart is flexible and able to respond and adapt to any demand that's placed on it. We will link it in terms of what I mean by a higher heart rate variability means greater emotional self-regulation. Heart rate variability is an indicator of the balance between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, which we'll define in the next slide. And less heart rate variability means less flexibility in your nervous system. So we just talked about parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, which are two branches of your autonomic nervous system. Your sympathetic being your fight, freeze, or flight, and parasympathetic being your rest and digest. And remember that you need both of them to respond in a healthy manner to life. So your sympathetic nervous system is not a bad thing, the culprit. You need both of them. What you do need also is the balance and the interplay between the two systems. Having enough of balance between, so not one overtaking the other, because that's when you will see the imbalances and actually feel them. So your heart and brain are wired together. You know, there's this sometimes notion that it's only the brain that communicates with the rest of the body, but that's not the case. And heart and brain are the two systems that more strongly than any other two systems communicate with each other. So heart to the brain via neural signals that really profoundly impact your brain function, and then backwards from your brain to heart through your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve is one of your cranial nerves, so the 10th cranial nerve actually. That's like a superhighway that travels from the brain into the rest of the body. And so it's not just to the heart, it's to the organs in the abdomen as well. And we won't get there. But so as it relates to the heart, it acts as a brake on your heart rate. So the heart then is innervated by both by your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And if your vagus nerve is not acting, the brake is not there, your heart rate is just going fast. And we need that brake, the vagus nerve, to be there to keep it under control. So again, it's the balance between the two systems. And remember that your heart sends much more information to the brain than the brain sends to your heart. You know, I put this slide because some time back, someone told me this, and I absolutely do not agree with it, that MAD stands for mental abuse to humans. And I put it here because of the next couple slides. So bear with me, it's not complicated, but I want you to understand it so you better understand heart rate variability. So remembering our math class, when we were taught cycles and waves, there were properties of them that were discussed, right? The amplitude, the frequency of a wave, the quality of a wave. What is important in the case of heart rate variability is the amplitude, which is how tall the wave is. And that determines basically how high or low your heart rate variability is. And then the form of the wave. So the smoothness of the wave, and I'll show you an example of not a smooth wave, is determining coherence. And coherence, which we'll explain further, is absolutely what we're looking for. So a coherent state of being. And lastly, phase angle. Phase angle is when we're looking at two waves at the same time. In this case, we're looking at heart rate variability and respiration, which we'll discuss in a couple of slides. So when these two peak together, that's the ideal state. That's when phase angle is 0 and it's most efficient, versus when it's 180, the phase angle, meaning one peaks and one valleys. At that time, that's the most inefficient, and that's in a state that is not coherent. So basically what we were explaining in the previous slide, if you look at the top graph, the blue graph, you can replace happy with all kinds of other emotions. So joy, love, gratitude, and this just state of being in the flow and doing something that you absolutely are passionate about, spending time with people that, you know, add to your life, versus feeling, or the bottom graph, the red graph, which says stress, you can replace that with feeling annoyed, frustrated, impatient, feeling like everything is like an uphill battle. You know, there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of friction, and just feeling overwhelmed. And if you look at it, so the top couple of changes, that the differences that you see, the top graph, you can actually see a decent amplitude. So look at how the graphs are defined. Your y-axis is your heart rate, and then your x-axis is the time. And so you can see there's heart rate variability in the top blue graph, versus you can barely tell what the amplitude of the waves are in the bottom graph. Further, look at how much more smooth the top graph is. The bottom graph is jagged, not a coherent graph. So how can you increase your heart rate variability? By developing an understanding of your baseline. So we've talked about this a couple of times now. Knowing where your baseline is extremely important. How else would you know what kind of changes to implement and what is happening anyways? But cultivating more of certain kinds of emotions, such as gratitude, and we talked about that in the previous slide. Give examples. By practicing to enhance your recovery time. What does that mean? Meaning, you know, nobody's saying it's unrealistic to expect that we should always all be happy and enjoy and in love. Life happens, right? But what the art of the practitioner who's working with you in regards to biofeedback, the goal is to enhance your recovery time. Meaning, whenever you're thrown out of coherence for whatever reason, you're able to come back fast. And the more you practice, the better you become. So that's what we mean by recovery time. By incorporating mindfulness practices into your daily life. You know, mindfulness practices really deserve a bigger, longer lecture on their own. So I would not be doing them justice. However, I could not put them there. So we will talk about them more. And there are a lot of resources online about first of all, what is mindfulness and examples of mindfulness practices. But they really, in this day and age where all we learn about is methods to be distracted, mindfulness practices are what kind of train us to come back and be present while life is happening around us. By increasing your vagal tone, again, outside of the scope of this presentation, and by learning how to use your breath to increase your heart rate variability, which we're going to talk about next. So, respiration. Breathing is the most important aspect of being alive. But is breathing responsible for more than just keeping us alive? Absolutely yes. You know, most of us breathe just enough to stay alive, but not to live and thrive. So how well and how often you breathe impacts your quality of life, the depth and the rate. So when we look at in biofeedback, when we look at respiration or breathing, it's the same as heart rate variability, where we look at a wave. And the amplitude that we discuss of the wave tells you about the depth, your depth of breathing. And the frequency, so how close those cycles are to each other, tell us about the rate. And the smoothness, again, which we talked about, shows us how smooth you breathe. That kind of makes sense, is common sense. And long-term overbreathing or dysfunctional breathing, meaning you use the wrong kinds of muscles to breathe, can trigger or exacerbate hypertension, heart arrhythmias, general anxiety disorder, migraine and tension headaches, chronic fatigue, IBS, and much, much more. So let's talk for a couple minutes about diaphragmatic breathing. Some of you guys might know or have heard it, but I want to get a little bit deeper. So first of all, diaphragm is a muscle. It's a muscle, it's a dome-shaped muscle that separates your chest from your abdomen. And it sits underneath your lungs, as you can see on the slide. As you inhale, what happens? You fill your lungs with air, hopefully, and you push on that expansion of the lungs pushes on the diaphragm. It gets out of its relaxed dome shape into a flattened state and pushes on your abdominal organs, and that's why your belly protrudes. So when they talk about belly breathing and they say, your belly should come out as you inhale and it should go in as you exhale, that's the reason why. And as you exhale, you take your diaphragm muscle back to its original, or relaxed, not original, but relaxed dome shape, and that compresses the lungs and allows you to expel the air. That's what should happen, but that's not always what's happening. So what you want in an ideal case is your rib cage to expand as you inhale and your belly to protrude, and vice versa as you exhale. Your belly goes in and your rib cage kind of contracts back in. And because we talked about the connection, remember we talked about the phase angle, we talked about coherence between heart rate variability and respiration. In order to achieve, this is where the connection comes in order to achieve the best ideal heart rate variability, it's been shown that when you're breathing at a rate of 10 breaths per minute or less, that's when you achieve it. And using biofeedback, we can actually measure what that resonant frequency or that ideal breath rate for you is. Okay, so how to improve your breathing? By developing an understanding of your baseline. Again, I will emphasize this because it's extremely, extremely important. And it gives you so much knowledge about yourself by incorporating mindfulness practices into your daily life, which can help raise awareness about when you hold your breath, breathe shallow or too rapid. Many of us, when we're thinking, we don't breathe. Or when we're stressed, we don't breathe. By using tools that can help guide you to breathe at a suitable pace for you, which I just spoke of, using proper muscles. Simply by practicing. You have to first undo the patterns that have been set for decades to retrain yourself to breathe properly. So there's no getting around it, You've been practicing. If you're not breathing right, you've been practicing it for however long you've been on this planet. So in order to undo that, the practice and the guidance for you to be practicing it right is extremely, extremely important. All right, so I promise we're going to talk about 2 cases of blood pressure and then brain performance. So remember we talked about autonomic nervous system and the 2 branches of it, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And those 2 innervate your blood vessels. So blood vessels that are lined by smooth muscle, and the smooth muscle of the vessels is innervated by your autonomic nervous system. So and what do? They control the contraction of that muscle. So your sympathetic nervous system contracts, allows for the contraction, and your parasympathetic allows for that relaxation. So the vessel either constricts, vasoconstriction, or dilates, vasodilation. And again, remember that neither of these systems are bad. They're both absolutely important. So it's the imbalance between those 2 systems that could potentially lead to dysregulation and then further down the line, high blood pressure. In addition, you have these pressure sensors or baroreceptors, which line some of the vessels that you have, like aorta or carotid arteries, that communicate to your brain in order to how to regulate your blood pressure. So over time, when there is that autonomic dysregulation, especially as it relates to your parasympathetic nervous system, these baroreceptors or pressure sensors lose their ability to properly respond to the changes. And therefore, they're not communicating properly to the brain. And then the brain cannot properly communicate with the body. So it's a cycle, and all of it is connected. So I had a 36-year-old male who came with high blood pressure. his systolic, or the top number, blood pressure was ranging from 137 to 139. And then the diastolic was 86 to 89. And what we did, thus far we've had 9 sessions together, and we started with respiration and then introduced heart rate variability. And we also did something that we haven't talked about today, but at the EMG, which is another biofeedback modality. And but I wanted to say a couple of things about heart rate variability training, which has been shown to be really effective with blood pressure control. So in a coherent state, remember we talked about coherence and how that is a goal, the ultimate goal. In a coherent state, the heart has to do less work. Remember, the heart rate and the inhalation are together, and then the heart rate going down and then the exhalation are together. So they're in sync. When that's the case, the heart has to do less work. And physiologically, that's what makes sense for the body. Whereas prolonged stress or chronic stress, now for this patient, has made the high blood pressure the new baseline for him. So what we wanted to do was to change it. And as we get more and more steadily into coherence, we change how the body is communicating to the brain. And then as a result, the brain can properly modulate and control our blood pressure. So over the course of working together, on average and consistently, we've been able to thus far decrease his systolic by 9 millimeters of mercury and his diastolic by 8 millimeters of mercury. And briefly on brain performance. So heart rate variability has been really looked at as one of the best, and nowadays as one of the best biological markers of aging. You know, athletes use it, high-performing CEOs use it, because it's also associated with better cognitive flexibility and performance. So remember when we were talking about how both brain communicates with the heart and the heart communicates with the brain. And we also said the heart communicates more with the brain than the brain does with the heart. So those neural signals from the heart to the brain profoundly impact your brain function. How? They impact your reaction time, your coordination, and your frontal lobe function. And what is frontal lobe in charge of? It's responsible for executive functions such as decision-making, judgment, problem-solving, impulse control, and social behavior. And really, you know, we've been talking about self-regulation. So now you're starting to be able to connect the dots. So we had a 41-year-old female present wanting to improve her cognitive performance. She's a high-stakes, high-stress job. A lot of people depend on her and for her to be able to make the right decisions. So she wanted to learn tools to allow her to perform optimally. We started with mindfulness practices, which we really just like touched not even the tip of the iceberg. Respiration and heart rate variability. We've had 7 sessions thus far, and this is what she's noticed over the course of our work together. And obviously both in the previous case and this case, they're still ongoing patients. Much more clarity and confidence, sustained energy and focus throughout the day, much less anxiety surrounding public speaking, better quality of sleep at night, feeling more resilient and able to respond to what life throws at her. And really there are a few things that I'll point out that I hear repeatedly from patients. More clarity and confidence. Remember, we talked about creating that space for you. Then you can reorganize and reprioritize your life. Better quality of sleep at night, and just feeling like you can better handle life and respond to what it throws at you. These are the things that I continuously hear. So one delineation that I wanted to make is understanding that coherence does not equate to relaxation. Because, and you know, not that there's anything wrong with relaxing, it's absolutely important for our health. However, you do not have to relax in order to be in a state of coherence. And if you are in a state of coherence, it actually optimizes your performance. It does not take away from it, which sometimes people associate relaxation with not being able to really be on top of your game. So coherence and relaxation are a bit different. It basically boils down to wanting to, coherence, allowing you to feel better and perform better. And, you know, looking around and realizing we're the state of affairs are in our world. I put that the second point on there, that we're hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. The survival of our species has been due to us coming together. So, I'm not a big believer in survival of the fittest and that competition at any cost model versus, the new, or not so new actually, it's been always there, the collaborative and cooperative model. And it starts for each of us by taking that self-responsibility to develop that self-awareness. And then we can, by how we show up in the world, we can impact the rest. So that taking that personal and social coherence and spreading it globally. And if the phrase global coherence initiative intrigues you, it's an amazing project. Check them out on Hard Math, and I put the link on there. So yeah, check it out and learn more. So you might say, biofeedback sounds great, but is it a good fit for me? How do I go about starting it if I'm interested? So first, are you interested in performing better, feeling better and performing better? And I would assume most of us say yes to that. Secondarily, you will meet with a practitioner who's trained in biofeedback to assess your case and determine if you're a good fit. And, there are rarely any side effects, but there are certain contraindications, which again that's the job and the role of your practitioner to review them with you and just understand your case. And based on the knowledge that he has of you, then they can determine the best individualized biofeedback protocol for you. Something that really fits your needs. And also, so by taking your case, they'll understand what your goals are in starting the training and making sure that you're on track and meeting them. All right, so if you want more information, please visit us at conscioushumanmedicine.com or my own website at drmahboubeh.com. You can call us at 424-331-0030 or visit our website, which I said, conscioushumanmedicine.com, if you would like to schedule a free 15-minute consult. And if you have anything to share, I would love to hear from you. Write to us at conscioushumanmedicine@gmail.com. Our goal is to create these video series to educate and to share and to empower. So if you have requests, if there are topics that you want to learn more about, even if it's about the topic that we've covered, but you want more in depth or certain aspects of it more in depth, please don't hesitate to write to us and let us know. And on Instagram and Facebook, you can find me at Dr. Mahboubeh. I hope this has been helpful for you guys, and I'm looking forward to hearing back from you and doing more of them.